Hi, my name's Ashley Pride, and I'm going to talk you through a research report that I wrote about the perception of egocentrism in Generation Y as previous generations seem to stereotype it. As suggested by Veenhoven, society in general and the way people live has significantly changed throughout past generations. The most distinct comparable generations being the baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y. It is because of these changes in the way that we live that reflects changes to our values and personality traits. Some values are simply not useful or relevant in today's society. However, this sparks passionate debate between the generations, each arguing that their own has most optimal living circumstances, values, and personality qualities. According to research from Twang and her colleagues, older generations label people from younger generations as being arrogant, self-centered, entitled, and disrespectful. Their research aimed to distinguish whether these perceptions were related to age or generational differences. For the purpose of investigating this, Twang and her colleagues used a cross-temporal meta-analysis method specifically designed to analyze generational differences in the personality trait of narcissism across time to eliminate age being a factor of influence in the narcissism trait. The Narcissistic Personality Inventory, the NPI, was used as a tool to measure how self-obsessed and self-entitled people were and compared generations. The results indicated that higher scores were observed given the later the year the data was collected. Narcissism scores had increased 1/3 of a standard deviation since 1982, which coincided with the conclusion that generations are becoming more egocentric. Other egocentric traits related to narcissism, such as entitlement, inner fixation, self-absorption, and self-esteem, have also been considered to have a correlational relationship with more recent generations. The conclusions reached by Twang and her colleagues have generated huge academic and non-academic debate and has not been widely accepted. Contrary to Twang and her colleagues, Howe and Strauss have found that Generation Y have proven to also have positive attributes such as a stronger social conscience, a greater civic mindedness, and they demonstrate a stronger sense of life being meaningful and purposeful. Veenhoven furthered this by concluding that Generation Y live longer, happier, and healthier lives. The difficulty with this research in this field is that it relies on self-report, and given that we are analysing undesirable personality traits, it is likely that participants will provide answers that they know will view them in a more positive way. Raymer and colleagues conducted a study where ageism and reverse ageism were examined in the workplace across members of Generation Y, Generation X, and the baby boomers. Their research found that 85% of Generation X and the baby boomers rated Generation Y lower on the positive descriptor scale and higher on the negative descriptor scale, where 1/3 of that group reported Generation Y to be less skilled, less responsible, in need of training in communication and etiquette, and that they acted entitled. They also found that Generation Y members put in as many hours at work as prior cohorts, that they hold internships at a much higher rate, and that they are more professional than other generations. It was concluded that generational assumptions are often caused by stereotypes and are not true reflections of generational personalities or qualities. The study of generational differences and shifts in personality is central to the lifespan development field, where the differences occurring throughout generations are important to consider and assess for the potential benefit of future generations. The purpose of the present research is to contribute to the evaluations regarding generational differences in personality traits, specifically reflecting egocentrism in generations by examining and comparing the 5 personality constructs implicated in Twang's study. Those are the sense of entitlement, self-esteem, narcissism, purpose in life, and hypersensitive narcissism personality traits. As is consistent with the results of previous research, the present study hypothesizes that the year in which an individual was born will be significantly correlated with the level of entitlement, self-esteem, narcissism, purpose in life, and hypersensitive narcissism, and also that there will be generational differences in those personality traits. Participants in the present study were allocated to generational grouping according to the year that they were born in, and are such as follows. Generation Y were those born between 1979 and 2001, Generation X were those born between 1966 and 1978, and the baby boomers were those born between 1946 and 1965. It is important to acknowledge that these particular allocation requirements into generational groupings are specific to this study and may differ in other studies. However, it is the same as in Twing's study. The participants of this study were 111 students from the Australian College of Applied Psychology. There were 60 participants from Generation Y, 28 from Generation X, and 23 from the baby boomers. Participants completed 5 personality questionnaires designed to test different aspects of personality, such as levels of entitlement, self-esteem, narcissism, purpose in life, and hypersensitive narcissism. The questionnaires that they completed were called the Psychological Entitlement Scale, the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale, the Narcissism Personality Inventory, the Purpose in Life Scale, and the Hypersensitive Narcissism Scale. The questionnaires were completed in tutorial times for online participants by accessing the links to the PDF files attached to the class spaces that contain the questionnaires, which they printed and completed with pen and paper, and in tutorial times for on-campus students where participants were provided with paper copies of each survey and completed using pen. All participants completed the survey within approximately 20 minutes. Participants were asked to complete it silently, independently, and as honestly as possible. Hypothesis 1 was tested using a Pearson's correlation, which showed that there was significant positive correlation between age and the scores on the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale and on the Purpose in Life Scale, but not the other scales. Therefore, Hypothesis 1 was partly proven. Hypothesis 2 was tested using a one-way MANOVA, which showed 9.3% of variance in personality differences, which was accounted for by generational differences, followed by a one-way ANOVA, which showed that the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale and Purpose in Life Scale were significant to account for these generational differences. Further, a Fisher's LSD test showed differences in Generation Y and Generation X on entitlement. Generation Y and baby boomers on self-esteem and purpose in life scale, and differences in Generation X and baby boomers on the purpose in life scale. Significant differences show that Generation Y scored higher on entitlement scale than Generation X. Generation Y scored lower on self-esteem and purpose in life scale compared to baby boomers, and also that Generation X had a lower purpose in life scale score compared to the baby boomers. The present research is consistent with Veenhoven's research, which identifies a change and difference in personalities across generations. The findings from the present research do not coincide with Tweng's research, which suggested that narcissism is related to self-esteem. If this were the case, then there would have been a more consistent and significant finding across each of the 5 questionnaires related to personality, and specifically a strong correlational relationship between the results of the self-esteem and narcissism questionnaires when comparing generational differences. Therefore, the present study does not support that claim. Inconsistencies between Tweng's research and the present research can possibly be explained by the previous research using self-esteem as a trait to measure narcissism, where having high self-esteem does not necessarily correlate with being narcissistic. Barry and colleagues furthers our findings and states that there is a lack of association between narcissism and self-esteem. Generational differences in achieving self-esteem could be because of value of social media in younger generations. Our study is consistent with there being a lack of association between narcissism and self-esteem, but is not able to support their conclusion of social media's role as it was not investigated in our study. Howe and Strauss found that Generation Y had a stronger sense of life being meaningful and purposeful than earlier generations. However, in our study, the scores of Purpose and Life Scale were lower for Generation Y in comparison to Generation X and the baby boomers respectively. This inconsistency can possibly be explained by considering how Howe and Strauss measured the quality of life and therefore the happiness or enjoyment of life an individual had at the time of the research. As stated by Veen, this particular evaluation is highly subjective and can be dependent on the type of events that had occurred or how they felt on a particular day of participating in the research, which can be seen as a limitation to the research area. In addition, the indicators involved in assessing meaningfulness and purpose of life need to be considered along with the potential restrictions on individual subjective values of what constitutes a meaningful or purposeful life. It cannot be concluded that entitlement narcissism, self-esteem, or hypersensitive narcissism are more strongly apparent in Generation Y compared to Generation X and the baby boomers respectively. Though as mentioned previously, it can be concluded that Generation Y have a lower sense of self-esteem and a lower sense of purpose of life. Some of the reasons given for this are, as Barry and colleagues stated, that there has been a significant increase in social media usage for communication. And as Van Heen stated, that there has been significant shift in the way we live, and therefore changes can occur as a result of this shift that has taken place where people in younger generations are having to adjust to new living styles. One limitation of this research was that all students were from the Australian College of Applied Psychology, where the majority of participants were female and from Generation Y, giving an unbalanced representation of each generation. Another limitation is that this research was cross-sectional, collected at one point in time where age effects could have altered the responses of participants. Also, as mentioned earlier, data is purely subjective, which means that it is free to individual interpretation. Suggestions for future research are that other aspects of personality are considered, where the questionnaires used in the research and in previous research are focused on assessing egocentric or narcissistic personality traits. Future research could consider a more positive set of attributes, where participants are able to record selflessness and a more humanitarian aspect of personality. This would be to determine which generation is more selfless rather than determining which generation consists of people with undesirable personality traits.